Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Holly Medill, and I'm the director of the National Charette Institute at Michigan State University, also known for shorthand as NCI. And NCI has 3 webinar series planned for this year. The first is the adaptation series. The second will help us expand our capacity for working across difference. And the third is on timely topics or interesting things that I think should be shared. So welcome to the launch of the first webinar of 2022 and the first in the adaptation series, where we'll talk to practitioners who've adapted the Charette process, whether it's a modified approach or a unique product or both. We are recording this webinar, and so after it's closed captioned, we'll post it on NCI's website. And for those of you who are new to NCI, NCI was founded in 2000 in Portland, Oregon as a nonprofit with a mission to train practitioners to help communities achieve self-transformation using the method of Charette's. In 2016, NCI's curriculum came to Michigan State University, and NCI is now housed in the School of Planning, Design, and Construction alongside 4 degree granting programs in urban and regional planning, interior design, landscape architecture, and construction management. And NCI is also closely associated with MSU Extension. In addition to conducting charrettes and coaching others through their management and facilitation, we provide certificate trainings on how to prepare for and conduct charrettes. And we've trained over 3,500 practitioners all across the globe. The Charette process and curriculum that we teach is based on over 30 years of learnings from conducting charrettes. And our goal is in the training is to really transfer that knowledge and insights to participants so that they can learn from both the mistakes and victories of past charrettes. We continue to work on improving our curriculum, so I'm especially interested in today's discussion for a number of reasons. So as with most things that I do, they're done better with collaborators. And I'd like to thank our behind the scenes help in making today's webinar possible. Paige Felice is troubleshooting tech issues that arise. Marie Rumenap and Dana Gutierrez will be curating our questions today that you put into the Q&A box. And Harmony Gamazel is managing the chat. And Leanna Harris helped to get the webinar logistics all lined up. So thank you all for your behind the scenes support. And finally, to the part that you and I have been waiting for. If you haven't seen the 2019 movie, The Best of Enemies, you're missing out. You're missing out on a gripping film, and you're also missing out on an interesting use of charrettes. Since that film was released, I've talked with numerous people about the charrette's potential in social justice, equity, and reform issues, and it's an excellent question that we continue to explore. But there might not be a better place to start than with the manager behind the charrette in that movie. And so I am very pleased to welcome our featured speaker for today's webinar, Bill Riddick. After thinking and planning about how to structure this webinar, I ultimately decided that it should just be Bill. I had so many questions for him and guess that you do too. So this webinar is going to be an interview or conversation style, even though the webinar format doesn't allow for a true conversation among all of us. But I'll get Bill going with my questions and then we'll add in yours. And so just a reminder, as questions develop for you throughout the webinar, type them in the Q&A box and Marie and Dana will monitor them and we'll take as many as we can. And so Bill, I'd like to thank you in advance for sharing your time with us today and your wisdom and your experiences. Thank you.
Just glad to be here.
So I am not easily starstruck, and just want to make sure that I'm not sharing my screen here. Great. I'm not easily starstruck, but I admit that today I am nervous and I am excited, and today I am. I might be fumbling over my questions, so please have patience with me.
Oh, no problem.
I'd like to start with your career, and then we'll move into general questions about charrettes, and then specifically about the Durham charrette, and lastly about current issues. Does that sound okay?
Sounds fine.
Great. Well, can you get us going with just give us an overview of your career, how it began, where it headed?
It began in eastern North Carolina on a farm. From there to North Carolina A&T State University, where I have a degree in agriculture engineering. And that didn't fit me too well. I'm raised on the farm. Now I'm sick of the farm. And went back to school at NC State University and got a master's degree in continuing education with a special interest in counseling adults. And that's sort of where I've stayed. I've spent the last 14 years working at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I was able to put together an educational base to prevention, where we were trying to level the care of the whole care spectrum to include prevention before we get to intervention and treatment. And that had worked well. I put together 6 life skills that my clients, didn't get better and better. So I decided I had to change, what I was doing. I put together 6 essential life skills that became part of the university, and we taught this base to folks, all the counties of North Carolina, I think 5 or 6 foreign countries, before I retired in 2004.
Great. Well, thank you. How did you come to use charrettes in your work?
That was really an accident. And
A happy accident.
it wasn't happy when it happened. I just got to Shaw University, which is one of the oldest HBCUs in the country, in Raleigh. It's located in Raleigh. And the vice president of the school asked me to help him with the charrette. I had never heard that word before, had no idea what it was, but I've only been there a couple of months. So if a vice president asks you to do something, yeah, that might be good. So the Office of Education had funded this piece for Shaw University. And I'm just sitting in on meetings. I don't know, I couldn't even spell charrette. And so I'm just sitting in on meetings and stuff. And we actually started the charrette. And I'm still in the background, minding my own business. The 3rd night of the charrette, the Black students at Shaw University asked all white people to leave and demanded that they leave. It wasn't just an act, it was a demand. And they left. The vice president, who had asked me to help, blamed me. I didn't know a single student's name. I've only been there 2 months, and I'm working in administration. I'm not working with students. I didn't know a single student name at that time. And he got very angry with me. Angry because I think because of my dress back in the day, with the dashikis and all that stuff, he associated me with radicalism and got very angry. And all in my face and said, "You run it. You've done this, you run it." That was scary. And he left the building and never came back, the whole charrette. So the Office of Ed, said, "Okay, we can do it. You can do it." And we did. And it turned out to be very good. We were working on a project where Raleigh was trying to do urban renewal. And doing that urban renewal, we were going to destroy a whole Black community because it was closest to downtown. And the government withdrew the funding, and we did not do that at that time. Obviously, as years have gone by, that community is gone, but that's how I got involved in the charrette.
And so,
well, let me tell you the second one. The Office of Ed was so impressed with how I handled it. They said, in Indianapolis, Indiana, we are building a new school. And will you do this for us? Will you go do this charrette for us? Yeah, sure. And that went really, really well. And then it was York, Pennsylvania, school system and communities that were not properly served. I'm trying to think of the newspaper that gave us a whole page, Time Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say much about me. They put a picture in there, but they talked about the process. And so all of that went good. How I got involved with the thing in Durham was the Office of Ed, and I had left Shaw University and set my own business up. And they came and said, we have enough money to do 2 charrettes in North Carolina, and we'd like for you to do that. And I said, oh yes, great, fantastic. And he said, can I speak to your bookkeeper? Well, it wasn't but one person working for that organization, that was me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a bookkeeper. And he said, is there someone you know well that has a nonprofit that we could give the money to? And that was Wilbur Hobby, who ran the North Carolina AFL-CIO. I called him. We had worked together on getting a guy elected in Chapel Hill as the first African-American person to head a southern city. So he said, yeah, we'll do that. And I live in Raleigh. Durham is about 25 miles away. I had friends in Durham that I thought would help me. And that turned out to be a real sham. Everybody, you know, Durham is a crazy kind of system. If you are poor and African American, you have 2 hurdles to cross. You've heard about the Black Wall Street and all that in Durham, North Carolina. I'm sure that was really a big thing. So you had a solid middle class, and then you had poor folks. The poor folks had to jump the middle class and then jump the white people. So I didn't know all of that until I got started with the charrette. And after sifting through, I did find 2 people who hated each other. They knew each other by sight. They didn't know each other by speaking, but by sight. And talked them into becoming co-chairs. And that's how Durham got started. The first day was the worst work day I have had in my whole life. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. Let me cut it off.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. And it came to be that I had to do it on my own. I couldn't rely on some friends that I thought I had part of that middle class little community. And it was, Wilbur helped me to get CP. And I went to see him, and that was not good. The movie has it pretty well, but it was just not a good visit. And Ann wasn't a good visit either. And the hatred, I wasn't used to that. So the first day of the charrette, if you paid me by what harm that I thought I had done, I would be wealthy. I came home that night because I was driving back and forth. It was only 20-something miles. I came home and said, and the move is correct, I said, I can make a living better than this. I don't have to do this to make a living. And about halfway not sleeping that night, I had to examine myself. My biases was between the 2 of them. I had to, early that morning, look myself in the mirror and say, wait a minute, if you could put your biases aside and stop trying to make these people who they're not, then you can be successful. So I went back to work the second day with the whole ambition is to get these people not killing each other and keep myself safe
Mhm.
and do this charrette. Remember, at that time, charrettes were 9 to 10 days. And so we had a long way to go. But that's how we got started. And then I would try to find something every day that they had to do together that didn't include me. And sometimes it was just crazy stuff. And they didn't recognize that it was crazy. It was just stapling paper stuff. Anything I could think of, I would have them do. The big pressure, though, was bring the people you represent. If they're not here, you're not represented. And both of them brought thy people every night to the charrette. So as I look back at my career, when I saw CP tear up that card from the KKK, was outside of my family one of the most touching things that has ever happened to me by somebody that I don't know, I didn't know. And it was a huge, you could hear a pin drop if you were in that building at that time. It was magnificent. And I still, some days when I'm reminiscing in my old mind, I will try to have that experience again. And one other thing that you might not know, we did a documentary where all of us, the two of them were still living. And that documentary was all over the country. We traveled lots of places with that documentary. And then a book was written sometime, I can't think the guy's name, but about the best of enemies. That's how the name got started. And I'm trying to think of the guy's name, but I'll think about it in a few minutes. But he wrote the book about best of enemies. But by the time he wrote the book, the documentary was already around the country, won several awards in that community, that in filming community.
Okay.
So that's how that all worked out.
Did you do lots of speech engagements around the documentary at that time?
Oh yes, we traveled all over the country. And then the guy wrote a play about the documentary. Well, not about the documentary, but about the thing that occurred. And again, he was from where was the man from? From the Northeast, and I can't remember the city right this, but he wrote the play, and the play has circulated all over. Last week, somebody sent me $9 of whatever money was, because I had, continuing
royalties.
Royalties. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, I had $9. So, but the pandemic it slowed that up a lot.
Yeah. In your use of charrettes, did you find that they just came to you, or were there situations where you were working in a space and thought this would be ripe for a charrette?
I stopped calling it charrette because people had that associated with 10 days. But I have used it many times. We did just a couple of years ago, they were building a road in a town in North Carolina where they were going to demolish a whole Black neighborhood. But they were going to also take some property from other people to get a whole middle class community from the golf course community to the bypass. And I never called it charrette. And I changed the mechanism of doing it. I created about 5 different community groups that covered that whole district. And each district then selected people that we would come to this big meeting one night. And it took me 3 months now to get to this big meeting one night. and we would vote on whether or not. Now, each one of these communities had to make a pitch about yes or no. And I was shocked on that one that out of the 5 committees, 4 of them said no. We're not going to build this road. We're not going to. And they were thinking about themselves, not so much about the Black community, but they're going to take some of my land, you know. And they voted no. And the money had already been allotted for this road that the state had to take back. But I never mentioned the word charrette because folks had in their minds that, oh, I'm not going to spend 10 days doing anything.
Right, right.
So, and I've used it really in my own family, getting getting things to go. I had a son who couldn't make up his mind about which college he wanted to go to. It really bothered him. So I got the whole family together and said, look, how can we help you? And everybody started saying the pros and the cons of the colleges that he had. And we got down to 2. And I said, now we got to make a decision on one. And we made that decision. He's a senior. He's in his last semester at St. John's University in New York, and have done well. But they didn't. I didn't mention charrette now.
I was just going to say, if he asked, did you just charrette me, Dad?
Well, he said that after he saw the film. He said that. He said, you charretted us. But it's a good way to get a decision made, and it will stay with me. And, you know, when I see a problem, the first thing I think about is who's saying yes and who's saying no. And if I can understand the no and the yes, I can put that together to get a yay or a nay.
Okay, I'm looking at my list of questions. Going to move down to, so you mentioned you know, a play that was written in a documentary, but you wrote a book too called Charrette Processes that's out of print, but university libraries, that's where I found it and was able to read it. And in the book you talk about it, and it's depicted in the movie a little bit too, but you describe several committees and how they function to prepare the charrette. And you talked a little bit about the highway charrette that you just conducted too. Can you walk us through how you prepare for a charrette and those committees?
The first thing is that there has to be a problem. And that problem, I will have to define in my head as to whether or not it is worthy of trying to do a charrette. Now, you know, you can't do a charrette. I can't do a charrette around, say, race, because people won't tell you the truth in public about race. So this is a hard one to get to. But if there is, in this case, it was school desegregation. And the other cases, and everyone that I've done that's been a case, building the school, whatever. So there has to be a clear path. Then you put together, I think, what I call an executive committee. The executive committee they're going to raise the funds, and they are going to oversee the charrette. And then we have to put together the communities that are going to participate. In other words, when I say that with CP and Ann, they had their communities already together. I didn't have to do any work with their communities. And my energy with them about the people coming was that you have to get them here every night. They have to be here every night. And we started about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And they had to get there every night. And then it was school out time. So we would have something for the youngsters to come and do about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the charrette would start around 4 to 5 in the afternoon. But I have used it in a lot of places that I never even mentioned the word. It's a good way to solve problems.
And Are you designing the process, or is the executive committee doing that?
The executive committee is the first folks I want to talk to. Those are the people who saying we need a decision. The highway people, you got to talk to them. First of all, you know, where are you in the development of what you're trying to do? They said, but we put the money aside and we can build this highway. That means that the highway is immediate and there has to be a decision made immediately. In some instances, the school that we were building in Indianapolis, the money had already been allocated. It was how and what we should go in that school. So you have to examine that top group of people are not participants so much as they are the funders and the people that will carry what decision you have made to the public.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so in your book, I like this, if I can just read this, it says, as the charrette begins to conclude activities, it becomes obvious that the steering committee and the executive committee, operating as individuals within a cohesive group, assume the reins for present and future community interaction. The charrette manager and his team fade more and more into the woodwork. And so it sounds like then that executive committee or steering committee then becomes the implementer of the decision or what the next steps.
Yeah, you're spot on. See, if
Okay.
it's going to happen, it's going to go back to that executive committee because they control the resources. So what you want to hand them is a clear path to what it is they were seeking to do. When I say clear path, I don't mean it has to be a yes clear path. It can be a no, path that this will not work. So, I just think we need to put it on the shelf. It will not work right now because the community said no.
Going back to the Durham Charrette, you mentioned that you lived, well, you live 25 minutes from there, and I want to touch on that. Let me go back and say, how much artistic license was taken with the portrayal in the movie versus the actual event?
We had the opportunity, my wife and I had the opportunity to read, and I'm sorry to say that she's deceased now, but
I'm sorry.
When the script was written, they interviewed us. The script was written, the script was sent to us. And she's an English teacher. She was an English teacher. So she put red lines through that whole script. And everywhere she put the red line, because they were untruths, they took it out. The only thing that is in the movie that is not based on truth is the last scene. The cars are coming and
right. Yep.
That did not happen.
Okay.
But the other stuff, every piece of it is the truth.
Wow.
And I would not have signed off on it. I let Hollywood do the last scene because he needed something to close it with. And so I said, look, I mean, that doesn't harm what it is we did. It just shows that these people got together. So, and they had gotten together. So that was good. That was okay. I went along with that. And I went to the shooting too, just to make sure that they were not lying to me. So I saw it all at work. I was not going to put my name on something that wasn't true.
Right. Great. As someone who lived there at the time that that charrette was happening, how did that impact your involvement? You talked about a few people that you thought you could count on to kind of get in there and get people coming, that you had to kind of abandon that strategy, but any other kind of ways that impacted your involvement?
I had put my, I thought my ace in the hole was that I knew many of the folks who were in that quote middle class. from playing golf and stuff of that nature. And I really thought I was going to get some genuine help, but they felt threatened because Ann had called them out. So they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And obviously, when you mention to them that this KKK person is coming, they get scared again, because they are friends with a lot of people that they know is hooked to that, but they don't want the public to know that they're doing business together. You know, and that's about money. There were several people who knew about the KKK and that these people belong to the KKK, and they didn't want to be associated in the sense of the public knowing that. But that was all about making money. It wasn't about anything else. People didn't matter so long as we make money.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you talked about, we're going to shift to current issues in just a minute, but one last question about the Durham Charette and kind of your Charette processes that you've used in general. What kinds of engagements, and you talked about the co-chairs giving them things to do, but how did you, or what kinds of exercises or activities would you do every night? Or was it just all dialogue that you were facilitating?
See, with the Charette, we break it down into several different problems that that community is facing. You know, unemployment. We do all this stuff, and we put an expert in a room where all the people, when they come in the Charette, where do you want to go, which group you want to be in, and we're looking at problems that is associated with the main problem, but people must have that say about things that affect them the most. And and that's the reason I like that, is that we get a broad participation. Now we're looking at solving one problem, but we're letting the people who are running this charrette, I'm talking about people above me, the other issues in this town or this community that you need to solve. And you know, school desegregation was a big issue, but there was also a big issue in funding schools, and a big issue in giving books from one school to another school. All that stuff got to stop. You know, you just can't do that. And that's not, you know, brought out so much in the charrette as it was when we were actually doing it. And when we completed it, those things had to be taken care of, although they were not major issues.
Okay. And yeah, so at the end of the charrette, it sounded like there was I know they remember talking about the books and the materials, and there were several different decisions that were voted up and down. Would that then be like, if I came on the Tuesday and I was interested in materials for students, I would go to room number 1, and then we would talk about, okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I want to shift to current issues, and I see that we have quite a few questions around that. Well, before I do that, there's one here. It seems that the executive committee or other leadership would call for the charrette process. How would you pitch the process to municipal state leaders to be receptive to the community's decision, particularly in cases where you're not initially invited?
The whole issue here is at the executive committee. See, I'm going to leave the town. The executive committee are the people who are going to have to take this information and do whatever they can do with it to achieve their goal, or the goal they had set out to do. When I leave the charrette, my job is over. And it goes back to the executive committee and the support they have gotten from whichever the yay or the nay that has happened. So they got a support system to then ask the state government or the county government or whoever is going to help with this project. They have that already there for them. So, And of course, I'm coming back to Raleigh. I'm coming home.
Mhm. Yeah. There's a few places where you describe in your book the importance of involving people in the decision making and kind of a power sharing structure. And when we talk about charrettes from NCI's perspective, we talk about like everybody has to participate in good faith. And sometimes that's really hard. That's really hard to do because you have the power brokers need to give up some of that power to be able to share that. I think there's a couple of questions here in that have been asked that I want to touch on. Have there been instances when you began the process and then understood there could be no power sharing by the executive committee and that they wouldn't accept the community's decision? What do you do in that case? Do you stop the charrette at that point?
We had that problem in Winston-Salem. That's where we tried to do the second charrette around school desegregation. And the school system itself said, we don't even want to hear this. We already under the scrutiny of the United States government, and we don't need another piece of this. And we ran the charrette knowing very well that whatever we came out with was not going to be valid. And I shared that with the executive committee and said, do we continue this? And they said, well, we got a commitment to people to continue it. And we continued it, finished it, but we didn't have a successful results out of it.
Okay.
But the exec committee, where the power people are, did not want to push the issue either. They thought it was going to be an easy task. But when people start to criticize them and that you got us now on the newspaper about how our schools are so different in poor communities than in communities that are not so poor, that we just don't want to be bothered with y'all anymore in the sense of doing this. Mm-hmm. So we stayed there about 8 days and picked up our stuff and came back home.
Okay. Shifting to kind of current issues and getting to a lot more of the questions that are in the Q&A. And thinking about the current climate of racial reckoning and social equity, I know that you said that you don't think that it's possible to use the charrette around race issues, but is that because you talked about the problem and defining the problem really clearly? Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
My experience have taught me that there are many, many people, and you can look at the last election and you can look at people who smile and say one thing to you, but their heart and mind is on something very different. I have run into that over the last 10 years, almost everywhere I've been, and trying to put groups together, that people are not truthful about how they feel. And instances where I was invited to communities that we looked at the film together, that question came up over and over and over. And I looked at it that this whole piece about race is individual. It is not about the group. And when I say that now, I'm saying it starts with the individual. And to me, until you are able to look yourself in the mirror and try to see a better human being, understand what biases you have, and understand how those biases are crippling you and it's crippling the community that you live in. That's a hard job for folks to do, but they surely are not going to do it publicly. And that's why the charrette just doesn't work good when you put race and all that, those things in it that's happening today. Well, it's been happening all the time, but it's prevalent today.
They still come into it, it seems, but it's not the focal point, it sounds like.
Well, see, my experience has been, it's always somebody else's fault. Why are these schools not as well as schools across town? Well, we had what we thought was necessary. No, you couldn't have thought it was necessary because the one across town is a lot better than the one over here. And see, it's hard to balance all of that, because what the person is saying out of his mouth is not what he's feeling in his soul and in his heart. Mm-hmm. And I see that now more than I've seen it in my whole lifetime.
Mm-hmm. That is, I don't like to hear that, but it's sensing that that's
just
the
look
case
around
too.
you.
Yep.
Yeah, just look around
Yep.
you. Look at the thing that happened January 6th. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's wild. It's crazy. But to try to put those folks, say, take 6 and say, we're going to put these folks in the charrette and we're going to talk about both sides. There weren't both sides. There was just one side.
Yeah.
Now, we'd like to look back to think it was, we could have done something, but those people who showed up for a reason, and they completed what they thought they had shown up to do. Yeah. So you can't charrette that.
No.
And well, you could, but it wouldn't do you any good. I don't think.
How would current use of social media and that lack of civility online impact the charrette as practiced here? And how could those challenges be addressed? Certainly that's.
It is when we are separated right now, and we are free to say basically what we want to. If you got all of us in the same room today, all of us would be careful about what it is that we're going to say, because we don't want the people called public sitting there say that we're out of step with the times. So in essence, then, we lie through our personalities. We smile and we wave, and the whole picture is, oh, I don't want to be here. Oh, I can't do that. Oh, I won't do that. And so people, I call it living lives, that you lie and you're living. Mm. And that's a big issue right now. That's a big issue where I live. Everybody smiles, but nobody wants to do the hard work.
Yeah. And
nobody wants to put money to do the hard work.
And it makes it hard, I assume, then to sift through. It makes the whole charrette preparation process potentially more difficult, because sifting through all the lies versus what you can actually work with, I assume.
It's hard for some people to put their feelings on the line, because they are convinced that their feelings are the truth about them. So they cannot say the truth about some of the things. So they kind of parade it as if, oh, I'm okay, I'm fine. Oh, I'll do this, I'll do that. But they won't, because that's not what's in their whole soul as they see themselves here in America on today.
And so how do you get different stakeholders to consider the challenges from different points of view? You know, in the Durham charrette, you were creating opportunities for them to have conversations, it sounds like. What other tricks in your bag do you have?
Well, in smaller cases, not statewide cases, we're working on some issues right here in Raleigh right now. And these issues have to do with participation, that we don't have enough folks participating in some of these issues that affect them. And part of it is they don't really know how to do it. And secondly, they're never invited to do it. And so we're trying to open the door so that some of these folks can get invited, you know, and about that situation and able to articulate that situation to people who can do something about it. And it's beginning to work. I don't mean that it's, you know, and it's sort of working without anybody really pushing it. There are folks pushing it, but we were pushing it softly. That you cannot have a group of people making decisions about this county without everybody being at the table. And they say, well, how do we get these folks to the table? They don't want to come to the table. Then that is not truth. We will get with these folks. We will prepare them to come to the table to where they can bring their own story and not having been told by us.
You mentioned earlier something about 3 months to get to the charrette. Is that what was happening in that time frame? Just kind of identifying everybody who needs to be there and the different kind of voices and representation needed?
Yeah, it's because, you know, when you get past your executive board, you're going to create, you know, the group of people who are going to represent these different people in the neighborhood. So you got to meet with them enough for them to, you know, say, what is the most important thing we need to work on? School desegregation in Durham. That was the most important. But what are we going to do about jobs? What are we going to do about education? What are we going to do about all the other things, even trash being not picked up in some neighborhoods, but once a month or something? How are we going to deal with that? And we put all that on the table, and we allow, and see, each one of these groups now, I will have an expert. When I say expert, a person on my staff who knows about this situation. And we will get those situations from the committee that we're going to meet with at least 5-6 times before we start the charrette. And we would have identified all the what I call the sub issues that we're going to deal with. Everything leads up to the big issue in Durham, which was school desegregation. But we had several other things that we had policy on and sent to different people that was on the executive committee that y'all need to have a look at.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't try to do that myself. You know, that has to do with the executive committee. They got to take that information to wherever it needs to go. Okay.
So one of the questions in the Q&A is around using it in school districts, which I know you talked about, but I have answered a couple of phone calls related to that. Is, can you use the process for, you know, our districts are shrinking or expanding, schools are closing, we're merging things. I assume, well, I'm not going to assume. Can you use the charrettes for those kinds of restructuring and school closure discussions?
We could, if we had the situation where there was a clear answer. Many of the things that's happening now, we don't have a clear answer to. For instance, we will, in Raleigh, for instance, they will say, we're going to put $6 million in these community schools to get them up to date to where they are as good as any schools in the county. Well, that decision has already been made that we're going to do this. The picture, though, is, when are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? How are you going to know what to do? And we could charrette that because it's already made. But to start from scratch to try to get to that point would be not workable. Yeah.
Can you speak to where common sources of funding come from for the use of charrettes, historically and currently?
Historically, the first 4 charrettes that I did actually came from the Office of Ed, Office of the United States Office of Education. They put up the money for those, and I got invited by them, to manage it. Now, in my own work, I have used the method, and as I said before, sometimes not even mentioning the word charrette, but I have used the method to solve community issues that I've been involved in, all the time. I mean, it'll work if you put the time to it, get the knowledge you need. It is the most helpful tool that I know to bring people together.
When you think about charrettes today, and you talked about the living lies and kind of that kind of scenario, are issues of safety involved? How do you approach that?
When you say
Weapons may
safety,
be
now
involved.
define what you're talking when you say safety. Safety, you mean people coming together?
Yeah, and
in a safe environment.
Yep.
Where nobody's going to bring a gun and shoot up folks.
Right.
That's I never had that to happen, other than, I talked about the Shaw thing when folks put the people out. I would guess now, with where the community is right now, if I were going to do a charrette right here in my hometown, I would surely ask the police to help me out. I would not see, something has happened in this culture that lives are not valuable anymore, and that it's okay if you don't like this person to shoot them. I mean, we see this, we've had more of that kind of stuff. Don't even know the reason why people got shot. We at a bad point right now. We got poverty. We got people who are underclass. We got people who are rich. We got people who are over here having a ball of their life. And these groups have not met each other at all. And so one group is afraid of the other. And I've seen this, the whole issue about the majority becoming a minority is frightening to some people. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's frightening some people. Some people are scared of that whole thing happening. I don't see it happening, and it might happen, but I don't see it happen. And then I don't see what the fear is, because the people that you're merging with understand better than anybody else what it's like not to be involved. And we don't want to ruin the involvement because we haven't been there. And you can't fight your way through that.
Yeah.
But this is a dangerous country. I mean, my community over the last 10 years have become extremely dangerous.
Talked about, we're in the audience of yes and no, but as a charrette manager, how do you convince, or how do you convince participants that you are neutral? And how do you build that trust?
I had to do that in Durham. That was the only place I had to really do that. And to be honest with you, I really didn't like either one of those people. And I told you earlier that I had to come home and get myself together because they both were so self-involved. And when I say self-involved, everything they said was right. And I had to demonstrate to them that there's another way to live. And I took that upon myself to say, if I can go there every day and put up with the junk they just giving me, just the two of them are giving me, and keep a smile and admire them for what they do that's good, and talk to them about things that I thought wasn't good, but not scolding them, said, well, I thought maybe we should have done that a little different. And we can get a conversation about it. But, today, I don't think that conversation is as possible as it was then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's one last question that I want to get to in the Q&A, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. Have any of your projects incorporated follow-up to confirm that decisions have in fact been implemented in the agreed upon timeframe?
That's has never been my job. My job is to get the yes and the no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any power past that. I can tell you what the community wants. Here it is. And it's up to you to do something about it. School desegregation, Durham did a good job with that. They did a very good job. And there are some people already integrated. The middle class folks already had folks in the Durham school system. But after then, you know, and when CP came out and said, yeah, you know, let's just do this, it calmed a lot of nerves in the white community, because they thought it was going to be some kind of a war, but it wasn't. And he is responsible for calming that situation, that every kid needs a right to an education. And so he took the weight and paid the price for it now, but he took the weight to do that. But for the charrette itself, for instance, you know, they built the school in Indianapolis. Whether they put all the stuff in that school that the community wanted, I have no idea. I have no idea. Right. My job is to get the answer and get the community to say yes or say no. And once that's done, once that's documented, once that is headlines in your newspaper, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Well, then just a couple set of final questions for you, Bill. It hinted to it in the movie, and I think I've heard it in some pre-phone calls that we have. Sounds like you are an avid golfer.
Yes. Played yesterday.
Gonna
play tomorrow.
I wondered if we were keeping you from a tee time.
No, not today. Yesterday, see, I got a Las Vegas thing I got to do at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I got a 6 o'clock thing I got to do today. Y'all working me hard today.
Sorry. What's on your bucket list for golf?
I've been playing the game a long time. Thanksgiving, I have 3 children and 7 grandchildren. They all came home for Thanksgiving, and that was partly to honor my wife. She passed in July, and they asked me, what is it you want to do? And I said, I want to go to Ireland. I want to play Carnoustie and play the old course. And they said, if my health stays good, not this birthday, because I got a birthday next month, next birthday, we will have that done for you. So I have to stay in good health, you know, exercise every day, take my high blood pressure medicine every day to make sure I'm here next year on March 13th, in somewhere in that time. But that's my bucket list right now.
What great motivation, and yeah, what a great thing.